Two commercial vehicles appeared in my driveway without warning, followed by a $1,800 HOA citation for unauthorized business use. She hadn't realized I had a storage agreement with the county fire department. At dawn on a Wednesday morning, I stepped outside to discover two enormous work trucks completely blocking access to my storage building. The engines were still ticking as they cooled, leaving fresh oil stains on my concrete pad. The acrid smell of hot metal and burning hydraulic fluid filled the morning air. From her front window, Sandra watched me with obvious satisfaction, clutching her morning coffee like she'd just won some contest I didn't know we were playing. She had no idea that Fire Captain Johnson would arrive in 90 minutes to retrieve emergency supplies. The violation notice she'd already drafted was about to become Exhibit A in her own misconduct case. This woman had just picked a fight with someone who keeps detailed records and works with public safety officials. What would you do if someone commandeered your property, then attempted to fine you for it? Share your wildest community drama in the comments. I'm Robert, and at 54 I've discovered that most conflicts have straightforward solutions. 3 decades maintaining aircraft engines at the regional airport taught me patience, precision, and how to identify problems before they become disasters. Nothing prepared me for Sandra, though. I inherited this single-story brick home in Oakdale, Texas, when my wife Linda died 2 years ago. The illness progressed rapidly, and the medical expenses consumed our savings. Now it's just me, my golden retriever Duke, and a property worth more than I can afford to maintain. Salvation arrived from an unexpected source. The county fire department needed secure storage facilities, and my detached 2-bay garage was ideal. The monthly payment of $350 might not seem substantial, but when you're surviving on disability, benefits, and a modest pension, it represents the difference between keeping your home and facing foreclosure. Captain Johnson has been utilizing the space for 14 months now, storing rescue equipment, emergency supplies, and hazmat materials. He visits twice weekly with clockwork reliability, maintaining complete professionalism. The concrete floor still carries the honest scent of aircraft fuel from my maintenance days, now blended with the metallic tang of firefighting equipment and the sharp chemical smell of emergency medical supplies. It's an ideal arrangement that serves our community while keeping my utilities connected. Then Sandra relocated next door. Picture a woman who believes operating a cleaning service qualifies her as the neighborhood's unofficial supervisor. HOA arrived 4 months ago with her husband Marcus, a construction foreman wise enough to work out of state 9 months annually. Within days, she joined the Homeowners Association Board and launched her mission to elevate community standards, which translates to making everyone miserable until they conform to her vision. She operates 2 massive vehicles, a commercial, fan-packed with industrial cleaning equipment and pressure washers, plus a personal SUV capable of towing a small trailer. Both exceed her driveway capacity, but rather than securing appropriate commercial storage, she decided my property offered more convenience. The warning signs emerged during her backyard gathering 6 weeks ago. I'm describing a full-scale production, professional catering, hired entertainment, sufficient alcohol for a wedding reception. The bass pounded relentlessly, rattling my windows past midnight. Around midday, both her vehicles materialized in my driveway as if they belonged there. I approached politely. The aroma of barbecue smoke mixed with diesel fumes was already triggering a headache. Sandra, I need these vehicles moved. Captain Johnson has his scheduled inspection this afternoon. She barely acknowledged me while arranging her catered display. It's temporary overflow parking. Don't be so theatrical, Robert. A few hours won't hurt anyone. 7 hours. She abandoned those trucks there for 7 hours while her celebration continued. When Captain Johnson arrived for his equipment review, he had to park curbside and maneuver around her vehicles like they were permanent installations. The gravel crunched under his boots as he took the extended route. Too professional to voice complaints, but clearly annoyed. I apologized repeatedly. Most embarrassing moment of my retirement. That's when I understood this wasn't about parking, convenience. It was about establishing dominance. Sandra was demonstrating that her priorities superseded everyone else's, including county emergency services. The harassment intensified immediately. The following week, I caught her photographing my property with her smartphone. documenting every corner like a private investigator gathering evidence. My garden, my fence line, even Duke's doghouse received the surveillance treatment. Simply updating neighborhood documentation for the association, she claimed with that same frigid smile. Then arrived the violation notice printed on flimsy copy paper that rustled like dead leaves. Unauthorized commercial operations detected. Terminate unapproved business activities within 30 days or face $1,800 penalty. She was targeting my lifeline. Standing there holding that notice, watching her smirk through her front window, the strategy became transparent. This wasn't random neighborhood conflict. This was economic warfare. Sandra had investigated my circumstances, identified my vulnerability, and launched a calculated campaign to eliminate my income and force a property sale. Unfortunately, she chose the wrong retired mechanic to intimidate. Duke growled softly, sensing the danger. Intelligent dog. He recognized we were under attack before I did. 5 days after that humiliating gathering incident, Sandra launched her first official assault. A certified letter materialized in my mailbox, one of those thick, legal-sized envelopes that screams expensive attorney and impending disaster. The return address read Oakdale Heights Homeowners Association, but I could practically detect Sandra's cheap cologne on the paperwork. The complaint accused me of operating an unauthorized commercial enterprise violating residential zoning regulations. According to her carefully constructed legal narrative, my fire department agreement constituted a business operation threatening neighborhood character and property values. She demanded immediate cessation of all commercial activity, plus an $1,800 fine for ongoing violations. Here's where her research proved inadequate. She'd scheduled an emergency board meeting for Thursday and conveniently forgot to notify me until Wednesday evening. Classic ambush strategy. Catch the target unprepared and bulldoze them into surrender. Too bad she selected the wrong mechanic to blindside. I spent Monday morning at the county courthouse, breathing in that distinctive aroma of aging documents and governmental bureaucracy while examining property records. The filing room felt like a library where enthusiasm goes to die, but sometimes mundane paperwork contains explosive revelations. "Well, I'll be," said Helen, the clerk, adjusting her reading glasses as she reviewed my original deed. "Your garage predates this association by 12 years, dear. That's what we call grandfathered protection." Helen explained something I'd never considered. When you construct something before an association exists, those improvements receive protection under grandfathered use provisions. Essentially, your property rights can be older and more powerful than their new regulations. Linda would have appreciated this legal loophole. She always maintained that the best defense was superior knowledge. But the real revelation came when I researched Sandra's own situation. Municipal ordinances clearly specify that commercial vehicles exceeding 8,000 pounds require special permits for overnight residential parking. Both her cleaning vehicles exceeded that weight, and she had 0 permits on file. Thursday evening, I entered that community center meeting room armed with facts and feeling dangerous. The space reeked of stale coffee and nervous perspiration. 5 board members sat behind a folding table that appeared salvaged from a churchyard sale, with Sandra positioned center stage like a magistrate at sentencing. "Mr. Richardson," she began, consulting her notes with theatrical gravity, "your unauthorized commercial lease clearly violates Section 4.2 of our residential use covenant. We're prepared to impose immediate penalties." "Hold on there, counselor," I interrupted, sliding my courthouse research across that cheap table. "My garage was constructed in 1989. Your association didn't exist until 2001. That's 12 years of grandfathered protection." The sound of rustling papers filled the sudden quiet. You could hear a pin drop until George Martinez, a retired mail carrier who'd lived here since dirt was invented, started chuckling like he'd just heard the year's best joke. "Robert's absolutely correct," George announced, reviewing my documents. "I remember when you built that garage. My late wife Betty brought you iced tea during construction." Sandra's face cycled from pale to crimson to purple in about 3 seconds. "That's completely irrelevant. Current zoning takes precedence." "Speaking of current zoning," I said, savoring every syllable, "let's discuss Section 11.4 regarding commercial." Vehicle storage in residential areas. I produced photographs of her trucks complete with manufacturer weight specifications and time-stamped overnight parking documentation. Both your vehicles exceed the 8,000-pound residential limit. You've been in violation for 4 months without proper permits. George actually slapped the table and erupted in laughter. Well, Sandra, sounds like you better study those zoning laws yourself before wielding them against other people. Looks like Robert just used your own weapons against you. The room went completely silent as everyone processed what had just transpired. Sandra had walked directly into her own trap, using zoning laws to attack me while violating those identical laws herself. Her face displayed about 6 different shades of humiliation. This is absolutely preposterous, Sandra exploded, her carefully constructed authority crumbling like wet tissue. I'm trying to protect our property values from his emergency services compound. You mean the arrangement that brings county fire protection through our neighborhood twice weekly? Asked board member Dorothy Walsh sweetly. The same one that probably reduced everyone's homeowner insurance premiums? The meeting disintegrated faster than a sandcastle in a tsunami. Sandra demanded legal action and stormed out, abandoning her violation notice like contaminated waste. The remaining board voted 4-0 to dismiss all charges against me and issued Sandra a formal citation for her commercial vehicle violations. Walking to my pickup afterward, I could taste victory in the cool evening air mixed with the lingering diesel exhaust from her illegally parked trucks. But through her front window, I watched Sandra pacing and gesturing frantically into her phone, probably speed dialing every lawyer and city official she could contact. The next morning confirmed my suspicions. Her trucks were strategically positioned to obstruct my mailbox access. Not technically illegal, but irritating enough to send a clear message. By afternoon, the city had received an anonymous complaint about excessive dog barking from my property. Duke hadn't barked excessively since adolescence, but facts don't matter during a harassment campaign. Round 1, Robert. But Sandra was just getting started. Sandra's public humiliation at the association meeting lasted exactly 48 hours before she escalated to City Hall. The certified letter from Oakdale City Planning arrived Monday morning, stamped with enough official seals to intimidate a federal judge. The complaint alleged that my fire department lease was creating an unauthorized quasi-commercial district that violated residential character preservation codes, complete with color photographs of Captain Johnson's emergency vehicle, equipment deliveries, and even shots of me conversing with county personnel in my driveway. Someone had been extremely busy with a telephoto lens. The letter cited Municipal Code Section 7.3 about maintaining neighborhood residential character and demanded my appearance at a planning commission hearing in 2 weeks. But here's what captured my attention. The complaint was filed by concerned residents but processed by Michelle Walsh from the planning office. That name sounded familiar since Dorothy Walsh from the association board had mentioned her daughter worked at City Hall. Small towns have a way of making everything family business, and apparently Michelle had inherited her mother's sense of justice along with her surname. I decided to visit Michelle before that hearing. The city planning office smelled like industrial carpeting and broken dreams, tucked into the basement of a municipal building designed by someone who clearly despised natural light. Michelle turned out to be a weary-looking woman in her 30s, who avoided eye contact like I was carrying a contagious disease. "Mr. Richardson," she said, fidgeting with her paperwork, "I assume you're here about the zoning complaint." "I'm here about the truth," I replied, settling into the visitor chair that creaked like old hinges. "See, I've been wondering how someone knew to file this complaint using exactly the right legal terminology and perfect timing." Michelle's face flushed red as a fire engine. "I can't discuss ongoing cases," she mumbled. "Fair enough. But while I'm here, maybe you could help me understand something about home business permits." I'd spent the previous evening conducting research that would have made Linda proud, diving deep into municipal codes until my eyes burned. Turns out operating a cleaning service from your residence requires specific permits, especially when you're storing commercial vehicles and meeting clients at your home address. Sandra's business registration listed her home as the primary office, but she'd never filed for a home occupation permit. The oversight was like leaving your front door wide open while complaining about burglars. Hypothetically, I continued, producing printed municipal codes, What happens when someone operates a commercial business from residential property without proper permits? Michelle reviewed the documents, and I watched her professional composure crumble faster than a house of cards in a windstorm. These trucks, how much do they weigh? She asked weakly. Over 9,000 pounds each, both registered as commercial vehicles. Both parked overnight in residential zones without permits, I explained, savoring every word. The irony was beautiful. Sandra was using residential character preservation laws to attack me while violating those exact same laws herself. There's something else, I said, producing photographs from her barbecue party showing client consultations happening at her residence. Cleaning estimates, service meetings, payment collections, all commercial activity in a residential zone. Michelle stared at the evidence like it might detonate. Mr. Richardson, this puts me in a difficult position. I'm not asking you to do anything dishonest, I assured her. I'm just wondering if the Planning Commission should have all the facts before making decisions about residential character preservation. 2 weeks later, the hearing room was packed tighter than sardines in a can. Sandra arrived with a briefcase and enough attitude to power a small city, clearly expecting another easy victory. She'd even dragged her husband Marcus along for moral support, though he looked like he'd rather be wrestling angry bears. Mr. Richardson's commercial lease operation fundamentally alters the residential character of our neighborhood, Sandra began, consulting her prepared notes with theatrical importance. We have documented evidence of increased traffic, commercial vehicle activity, and unauthorized business operations. She presented her photo evidence with the confidence of a prosecutor making a slam-dunk case. Every image designed to make my arrangement look like a truck stop operation. Then it was my turn. Commission members, I said, standing slowly for maximum dramatic effect. Mrs. Thompson is absolutely right about protecting residential character. That's why I was surprised to discover her own violations of the same codes she's citing. I presented my counter-evidence methodically. Sandra's unpermitted home business operations, her commercial vehicles exceeding residential weight limits, client meetings conducted at her residence without proper zoning variances. Every violation she'd accused me of, she was committing herself, only worse. The best part? Michelle Walsh had done her homework after our conversation, and the Planning Commission had a complete file of Sandra's violations sitting right there, on the table. Commission Chairman David Hayes cleared his throat with the authority of someone about to drop a bomb. Mrs. Thompson, it appears you're operating a commercial cleaning business from your residence without proper permits. Sandra's confident expression melted like ice cream in August heat. That's completely different, she sputtered. Actually, Hayes continued, Mr. Richardson's arrangement appears to be properly documented and legally established, while your business operations are not. The commission voted 5-0 to dismiss the complaint against me, and issued violation notices to Sandra for unpermitted commercial operations. Marcus looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear forever. Walking out of that hearing, I could smell victory mixed with Sandra's desperation. But I also knew this wouldn't end here. Public embarrassment twice in a month would drive someone like Sandra to dangerous desperation. Sure enough, the next morning brought fresh scratches on my mailbox and an insurance claim notice in my driveway. Round 2. Robert. But the game was just getting interesting. The insurance claim notice appeared in my driveway like a rotten surprise, fluttering in the morning breeze alongside what looked like fresh evidence of vandalism. According to Sandra's meticulously detailed complaint, Captain Johnson's emergency vehicle had allegedly scraped her fence during a routine equipment pickup, causing extensive property damage and ongoing safety concerns. The estimated repair cost, $20,800, plus additional compensation for emotional distress and inconvenience. I walked over to examine the so-called damage, Duke trotting beside me with his nose working overtime. The scratches on Sandra's wooden fence looked fresh enough to still smell like paint thinner. That sharp chemical odor that burns your nostrils and screams recent application. The marks ran in perfectly straight lines about bumper height, too uniform to be accidental damage. Either Captain Johnson had invented a way to scrape wood through solid air, or someone had gotten creative with spray paint and a putty knife. Morning, Robert. called my neighbor Agnes from her garden where she was deadheading roses with the precision of a surgeon. At 76, Agnes had survived the neighborhood's evolution from farmland to subdivision, and her memory was sharper than her pruning shears. Saw some interesting activity over at Sandra's place yesterday evening. Woman was out there with a can of something, working on that fence real hard. She paused, giving me a look that could cut glass. Funny thing is, I could have sworn that fence looked fine during my afternoon walk. Agnes's security camera system was the neighborhood's unofficial surveillance network, documenting everything, from package deliveries to Sandra's escalating harassment campaign. You might want to check the timestamp on my video from around 7:15 last night, she suggested with the subtle cunning of someone who'd learned that evidence beats accusations every time. I contacted my insurance company immediately, speaking with Investigator Paul Thompson, who'd been handling fraudulent claims longer than I'd been fixing engines. Paul had that weary tone of someone who'd seen every scam in the book twice. Mr. Richardson, we get about 8 fabricated damage claims every month. Most people aren't smart enough to stage them properly, which makes our job easier. He explained that insurance fraud investigations follow specific patterns: timeline analysis, damage assessment, witness interviews, and most importantly, video evidence review. When people try to scam insurance companies, they usually forget about security cameras until it's too late. What makes this one suspicious? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Well, for starters, the complainant filed within 8 hours of the alleged incident with professional quality photographs and a repair estimate from a contractor who happens to share her business address. That's either remarkable efficiency or remarkable preparation. Paul arrived the next morning with measurement tools and a camera that could probably photograph fingerprints on raindrops. The fence damage told its own story under professional scrutiny. Scratches too uniform, too fresh, and applied from the wrong angle to match any vehicle impact pattern. These marks were made by hand tools, probably a putty knife or scraper, he explained, pointing out subtle differences in depth and direction. Vehicle damage creates irregular patterns from impact forces and momentum. This looks like someone used a ruler for guidance. The security camera footage was the knockout, punch Sandra never saw coming. Agnes's camera had captured her working on the fence at 7:23 p.m. the previous evening, carefully applying gray spray paint in measured horizontal lines. The video quality was clear enough to read the Krylon label on the paint can, and the timestamp proved the damage occurred more than 10 hours after Captain Johnson's last visit to my property. You could even hear Sandra muttering to herself as she worked, probably rehearsing her victim story. When Paul confronted Sandra with the evidence, the transformation was spectacular. She went from confident complainant to panicked defendant faster than a muscle car hitting a brick wall. Mrs. Thompson, Paul said with the patience of someone delivering bad news professionally, insurance fraud is a felony carrying serious penalties, including potential jail time and permanent criminal records. The color drained from Sandra's face like someone had pulled a plug. This is all a misunderstanding, she stammered, suddenly unable to maintain eye contact with anyone. I was just touching up some existing damage. The video shows you creating damage, not repairing it, Paul replied, consulting his notes like a prosecutor reading charges. You have 24 hours to withdraw this claim voluntarily, or we'll be filing criminal charges with the county prosecutor's office. Sandra withdrew the claim before lunch, but her reputation was permanently damaged. Word travels faster than gossip in small towns, and by evening, everyone knew about her failed insurance scam. The incident finally pushed Marcus over the edge. That night, I overheard him through their open kitchen window, his voice carrying the exhausted frustration of a man who'd reached his breaking point. Sandra, this has got to stop. Insurance fraud? Really? I'm not going to prison because you can't handle losing an argument. Their marriage was cracking under the pressure of her obsession, and Marcus was smart enough to start planning his exit strategy. But cornered animals are the most dangerous. The next morning brought anonymous complaints to animal control about Duke's aggressive behavior, plus a mysterious inspection notice from the health department about unsanitary property conditions. Sandra was running out of official channels, which meant she'd probably start getting creative soon. Round 3, Robert. But I had a feeling the real war was just beginning. Story continues with the same narrative structure, covering the property tax reassessment scheme, building the neighborhood coalition, Sandra's escalating desperate acts including the motor, oil dumping and emergency services interference, the final confrontation with the bribery attempt and threats, leading to the town hall meeting and Sandra's arrest. The conclusion shows the community's transformation and Robert's establishment of the Linda Richardson Memorial Scholarship Fund, ending with the message about community solidarity and encouraging readers to share their own stories. The county tax reassessment notice arrived on a Tuesday that started normal and ended with my world tilted sideways. Oakdale County was conducting routine property value updates, bureaucratic speak for, "We need more money and you're going to provide it." My modest ranch house had apparently increased in value by 38% over the past 3 years, which meant my property taxes were about to jump from manageable to catastrophic. I spread the paperwork across my kitchen table, that familiar sinking feeling settling in my stomach like bad coffee. The new assessment put my annual tax bill at nearly $5,200, double what I'd been paying. With my disability pension and small Social Security payments, there was no way to cover that increase without the fire department lease income. Hell, even with that $350 monthly, I'd be cutting things dangerously close. That's when I realized why this reassessment felt suspicious. The timing was too convenient, coming right after Sandra's public failures with the association and city planning. Property tax assessments usually happen county-wide, but this notice specifically targeted my address and 4 others on our street, all longtime residents, all living on fixed incomes, all coincidentally dealing with recent HOA complaints. I drove to the county assessor's office the next morning, hoping to find answers in a building that smelled like old carpet and broken dreams. The clerk, a harried woman named Janet, pulled up my property records with the efficiency of someone who'd answered these questions too many times. "Your assessment was flagged for review based on a complaint about unauthorized commercial improvements," she explained, highlighting sections of the report. "Someone reported that you'd converted residential space for business use without proper permits." The complaint had been filed anonymously, but the description was suspiciously detailed, mentioning the fire department lease, equipment storage, and alleged property modifications that didn't exist. Someone had done their homework before trying to weaponize the tax system against me. "Janet," I said, keeping my voice calm despite the anger building in my chest, "that garage was built in 1989. Nothing's been modified or converted. It's the same structure that's been there for decades." She frowned at her computer screen. "The complaint suggests recent commercial improvements and increased property utilization. Our assessor based the new valuation on those reported changes. The system was working exactly as designed. Anonymous complaints triggered reassessments which increased tax burdens which forced people out of their homes. It was elegant in its cruelty. But then Janet said something that changed everything. "You know, this complaint came through unusual channels. Most reassessment requests come from real estate agents or developers looking to establish market values. This one came directly from a city planning office referral." City planning office. Michelle Walsh, who'd been feeling guilty about helping Sandra with the zoning complaint. I drove straight to City Hall where Michelle was waiting with the expression of someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret. "Mr. Richardson," she said before I could speak, "I need to tell you something about that tax reassessment." She explained that Sandra had been pressuring her to find creative solutions for problematic property owners, specifically mentioning elderly and disabled residents who couldn't fight back effectively. The tax reassessment was supposed to be the final blow, force me into financial crisis, make the fire department lease unsustainable, and create an opportunity for property acquisition. "She's been asking about other residents too," Michelle admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street, the Rodriguez family on Oak Avenue, all longtime homeowners, all dealing with unexpected HOA problems recently." The pattern was becoming clear. Sandra wasn't just targeting me. She was running a systematic campaign to force out established residents and acquire undervalued properties for her expanding cleaning business. But Michelle's guilt had produced an unexpected gift. "I made copies of everything before I realized what was happening," she said, sliding a manila envelope across her desk. Sandra's requests, the complaint details, even some emails discussing neighborhood investment opportunities. She paused, meeting my eyes for the first time. I can't undo the reassessment immediately, but this evidence might help you fight it. Walking back to my truck, I felt the pieces clicking together like a puzzle Linda would have solved in minutes. This wasn't personal harassment, this was business. Sandra had identified vulnerable homeowners, researched their financial situations, and developed a strategy to force them out through systematic harassment and bureaucratic manipulation. Too bad she'd picked the wrong mechanic to underestimate. Time to shift from defense to offense. That manila envelope from Michelle felt like holding dynamite with a lit fuse. But dynamite only works if you know how to use it properly. I needed help. And fortunately, small towns run on networks of people who've been watching out for each other longer than Sandra's been alive. My first stop was the Legal Aid Society office in the county courthouse basement, a cramped space that smelled like coffee grounds and determination. Attorney Rebecca Martinez, Captain Johnson's sister as it turned out, specialized in elder abuse and property rights cases. She reviewed Michelle's evidence with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining X-rays. "This is systematic harassment with clear financial motivation," she said, spreading the documents across her desk like a battle plan. "We're not talking about neighbor disputes anymore. This is organized intimidation designed to force property sales." Rebecca explained that harassment campaigns targeting vulnerable homeowners follow predictable patterns. First, identify properties in desirable locations owned by people with limited resources to fight back. Second, use official channels like HOA complaints and city violations to create financial pressure. Third, escalate until the targets either sell cheap or lose their homes to tax liens. "Your case is textbook predatory behavior," she said. "But having documentation this detailed is extremely rare. Most victims don't know what's happening until it's too late." She outlined our legal strategy: document everything, file harassment complaints with multiple agencies, and prepare both civil and criminal charges. But more importantly, she suggested expanding the coalition to include other targeted residents. "Predators like Sandra rarely stop with one victim," Rebecca warned. "If we can identify her other targets, we can build a pattern of behavior that's much harder for authorities to ignore." My next stop was Agnes's house, where I found her hosting what she called afternoon tea, but what looked more like a strategic planning session. 3 other longtime residents sat around her kitchen table, all dealing with recent HOA complaints or unexpected city violations. Mrs. Patterson from Elm Street had received noise complaints about her air conditioning unit. The Rodriguez family on Oak Avenue was fighting allegations of unauthorized vehicle storage for their work truck. George Martinez, the former mail carrier, had been cited for excessive lawn ornaments, his garden gnomes, which had been neighborhood fixtures for 15 years. "Sandra's been busy," Agnes observed, refilling coffee cups with the efficiency of someone who'd been organizing neighbors since before HOA boards existed. "Every complaint filed within the past 4 months, all targeting people who've been here longer than her sidewalk. The pattern was undeniable once you knew what to look for. Systematic harassment designed to force out established residents and create opportunities for property acquisition." George had done his own research, pulling HOA board meeting minutes, going back to Sandra's arrival. "She's been asking detailed questions about property values, ownership duration, and financial hardship cases," he reported, adjusting his reading glasses. "Even requested a list of residents over 65, claiming it was for community outreach planning." The woman had been building target lists like a military operation. Mrs. Patterson, a retired teacher with the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent 40 years managing teenagers, had noticed something else. She's been photographing properties when owners aren't home, measuring driveways, even checking mailboxes for mortgage company letters. The reconnaissance had been thorough and systematic, gathering intelligence for maximum impact timing. We decided to coordinate our response through what Agnes diplomatically called enhanced neighborhood communication. Everyone would document future incidents with timestamps and photographs. George would monitor HOA activities and provide early warning about upcoming complaints. Mrs. Patterson would organize other targeted residents and share legal resources. I would serve as the primary liaison with law enforcement and legal aid. But our most valuable asset was the broader community support we'd been building without realizing it. Local business owners, the hardware store, the diner, even the gas station, had been watching Sandra's escalating behavior with growing concern. Small-town businesses depend on stable neighborhoods, and systematic harassment campaigns are bad for everyone's property values. Tony Castellanos, who owned the hardware store where Captain Johnson bought supplies, offered to document any unusual purchases that might indicate escalation plans. "Woman came in last week asking about security cameras and motion sensors," he reported. "Said she needed to monitor property boundary violations. Didn't feel right, so I told her we were out of stock." The diner owner, Maria Santos, had overheard Sandra's phone conversations during lunch meetings with contractors and real estate agents. "She's been discussing development opportunities and neighborhood improvements that sound more like property flipping schemes," Maria reported. Even mentioned specific addresses and asking prices. By evening, we'd assembled what Rebecca called the most comprehensive harassment documentation she'd ever seen. Video evidence, witness statements, financial records, and most importantly, evidence of Sandra's systematic targeting of vulnerable residents. We had enough material to file complaints with the county sheriff, the district attorney's office, the state real estate commission, and the federal housing authority. But documentation only works if you're prepared to use it strategically. Rebecca scheduled meetings with law enforcement agencies for the following week, while I prepared for what would probably be Sandra's most desperate escalation attempts yet. Cornered predators don't surrender quietly. They usually double down with increasingly dangerous behavior. The coalition was ready. Time to see how far Sandra was willing to go to protect her schemes. Sandra's desperation revealed itself in increasingly sloppy attacks that showed she was running out of both patience and intelligent options. The morning after our coalition meeting, I discovered that someone had dumped motor oil across my driveway during the night, creating a slick mess that stank like a garage fire and would cost hundreds to clean properly. The timing wasn't coincidental. Captain Johnson was scheduled for his weekly equipment check that afternoon, and navigating that oil slick would be both dangerous and embarrassing. But Sandra had made her first serious tactical error. Motor oil doesn't just disappear, and the trail of droplets led directly from my driveway to the storm drain, then continued in a suspicious line toward her property. More importantly, she'd used the same high-viscosity oil that cleaning equipment requires, the kind that leaves distinctive additive signatures when tested. I called Rebecca immediately, who arranged for environmental services to document and test the contamination. Illegal dumping of petroleum products carries serious environmental penalties, especially when it threatens municipal water systems. The attacks escalated throughout the week with amateur-hour sabotage that would have been laughable if it wasn't so malicious. Someone loosened the bolts on my mailbox post, leaving it wobbling dangerously close to the street. My garden hose was cut in 3 places, flooding the side yard and killing Linda's prized rose bushes. Duke's water bowl was mysteriously filled with what smelled like bleach, forcing an emergency vet visit that confirmed chemical poisoning attempts. Each incident was documented with photographs, timestamps, and witness statements from neighbors, who were now actively watching for suspicious activity. The pattern revealed Sandra's growing desperation and declining judgment. Instead of sophisticated harassment through official channels, she devolved into crude vandalism that left evidence trails a blind detective could follow. Agnes's security camera system captured shadowy figures moving through our yards after midnight, always approaching from the direction of Sandra's house. The footage quality wasn't clear enough for positive identification, but the timing and movement patterns were building a convincing circumstantial case. George Martinez discovered something even more damaging during his HOA board monitoring. Sandra has been using board letterhead to file false complaints with multiple city departments, he reported during our evening strategy session. Noise violations, health code infractions, even allegations of illegal dumping, all targeting the same longtime residents we identified. She was essentially impersonating official HOA business to weaponize city bureaucracy against her targets. That level of fraud elevated her harassment campaign into serious criminal territory. The breakthrough came when Mrs. Patterson's security system captured Sandra in the act of damaging property. The retired teacher had installed motion-activated cameras after her air conditioning unit was vandalized, and Tuesday night's footage showed Sandra clearly attempting to disconnect electrical connections to the outdoor unit. The video quality was courtroom-ready with timestamps, clear facial identification, and documentation of criminal trespass and attempted destruction of property. But Sandra's most serious error was interfering with emergency services. Thursday morning brought a house fire 3 blocks away. Mrs. Morgan's kitchen caught fire during breakfast preparation, filling her home with dangerous smoke. When the fire department responded, they found their usual equipment access blocked by strategically placed construction barriers that hadn't been there the previous day. The barriers forced firefighters to drag hoses an additional 100 yards, delaying their response by precious minutes, while an elderly woman's life hung in the balance. Fire Chief William Torres was furious when he discovered the barriers had been placed without city permits or notification to emergency services. Someone deliberately obstructed emergency access during an active fire response, he announced at an emergency city council meeting. This isn't vandalism or harassment. This is criminal endangerment that could have killed someone. The barriers had been purchased from Sandra's regular supplier and delivered to locations that would specifically impact emergency response to the targeted neighborhood. The interference with emergency services was the final straw that pushed our situation from civil dispute into criminal investigation territory. Sheriff's Deputy Martinez filed a formal report with the county prosecutor's office documenting the pattern of escalating harassment, property destruction, and public safety interference. This has moved beyond neighbor disputes, he explained during his official statement. We're looking at organized criminal activity designed to force property sales through intimidation and sabotage. Local newspaper reporter Sarah Kim began investigating after Chief Torres's public statements about emergency access interference. Her preliminary article, Systematic Harassment Campaign Targets Elderly Residents, brought regional attention to Sandra's activities and prompted calls from other communities dealing with similar predatory behavior. The story was gaining momentum that would be impossible for Sandra to control or contain. By Friday evening, Sandra's cleaning business was hemorrhaging clients as word spread about her criminal activities. Marcus's truck was conspicuously absent from their driveway most nights, and neighbors reported hearing heated arguments about lawyers, divorce proceedings, and bankruptcy possibilities. The pressure was finally breaking apart her life the same way she'd tried to destroy ours. But cornered predators become most dangerous when they realize their schemes are collapsing. Saturday morning brought an envelope under my door containing photographs of my daily routines, Duke's walking schedule, and even shots taken through my kitchen window. The message was clear. If legal harassment couldn't force me out, maybe personal intimidation would succeed. Time for the final confrontation. Our coalition had the evidence, the community support, and the legal backing to end this war once and for all. Sunday morning arrived with unseasonable quiet, the kind of stillness that makes you check over your shoulder, expecting trouble. I was refilling Duke's water bowl when Sandra appeared at my back gate, dressed in what she probably considered her most trustworthy outfit, pressed khakis and a polo shirt that screamed, "Reasonable person making a reasonable offer." The transformation from harassing neighbor to concerned citizen would have been convincing if I hadn't spent months documenting her escalating criminal behavior. "Robert," she called out with artificial sweetness that made my teeth ache. "Could I have a word with you? I think we need to clear the air about all these misunderstandings." She was carrying a manila envelope, thick enough to contain either legal documents or something more interesting. Given her track record with envelopes, I was betting on the latter. I activated the voice recording app on my phone before opening the gate, a habit Rebecca had drilled into me after we'd started building the criminal case. "What can I do for you, Sandra?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral while Duke positioned himself between us with the protective instincts of a dog who'd learned to recognize threats. "Look, I know things have gotten a little heated between us," she began, settling into what was obviously a rehearsed speech. But I've been thinking about how we can resolve this whole situation without involving lawyers and courts and all that unpleasantness. She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of cash thick enough to choke a horse. I'm prepared to offer you $18,000 cash to voluntarily terminate your arrangement with the fire department. Clean break, no hard feelings. Everybody wins. The smell of fresh bills mixed with her desperation was almost overwhelming. $18,000 represented more money than I'd seen in one place since Linda's life insurance payout, and Sandra knew exactly how tempting that would be for someone facing increased property taxes and mounting legal bills. She'd done her financial homework before making this offer. That's very generous, I said carefully, letting her dig her own grave deeper. But why would you want me to end a legal arrangement that benefits the community? She leaned forward with the intensity of someone making their final play. Between you and me, Robert, I've got some big plans for this neighborhood. Development opportunities that could benefit everyone, but they require certain adjustments to the current situation. There it was, the admission Rebecca had been hoping for. Sandra was essentially confessing to a systematic scheme to manipulate property values and force out longtime residents for development purposes. What kind of development opportunities, I asked, keeping her talking while the recording app captured every incriminating word. Well, your corner lot has tremendous commercial potential, she explained, warming to her subject like a salesperson closing a deal. Prime location, existing infrastructure, easy access for commercial vehicles. With the right improvements, it could be worth 3 times what you paid for it. She paused dramatically. Of course, that would require removing certain complications that might interfere with proper development. The bribery attempt was textbook criminal behavior, but Sandra wasn't finished digging her legal grave. I should mention that if you're not interested in this generous settlement offer, things could become very difficult for you, she continued, her voice taking on a harder edge. I have connections at City Hall, county planning, even the state, real estate commission. People who can make life very unpleasant for someone who refuses to be reasonable about legitimate business opportunities. That crossed the line from bribery into extortion territory, and I could practically hear Rebecca cheering from her legal aid office. Are you threatening me, Sandra? I asked, giving her one final chance to back down before she committed to felony charges. I'm just explaining reality, she replied with the cold confidence of someone who thought they held all the cards. Small towns run on relationships and favors. People who cooperate with community improvement efforts tend to have fewer problems. With permits, inspections, tax assessments, that sort of thing. People who fight progress sometimes find that bureaucracy can be very challenging. The recording was gold-plated evidence of attempted bribery, extortion, and abuse of public office. Connections. But Sandra still wasn't finished destroying herself. Think about it carefully, Robert. $18,000 cash, no questions asked. Clean break from all this mess. Or you can keep fighting and watch your life get very complicated very quickly. She slid the envelope across my patio table like a poker player going all in. I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening. After that, this generous offer expires and we handle things the hard way. I looked at the money, then at Sandra's expectant face, then at Duke, who was growling low enough to rattle windows. I'll definitely think about it, I said. Which was technically true since I'd be thinking about how to use this recording to put her in prison. Can I keep this overnight to consider my options? Her smile was pure predatory satisfaction. Of course. Just remember, this is your chance to walk away from all this unpleasantness with your dignity and your bank account intact. She stood to leave, then turned back with an afterthought that sealed her fate. Oh, and Robert, I'd hate for anything unfortunate to happen to Duke while you're making your decision. Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents in neighborhoods where people aren't being cooperative. That threat against my dog was the final nail in her criminal coffin. Duke wasn't just property to threaten, he was family. And threatening family meant Sandra had just declared total war against someone with the evidence, community support, and legal backing to destroy her completely. Tomorrow's town council meeting was going to be very interesting. The town council, Chambers had never seen a crowd like Tuesday evening's turnout. Every seat was filled with standing room only along the walls and people spilling into the hallway like it was a championship game, instead of a municipal meeting. Word had spread through Oakdale's networks faster than gossip at a church social. The showdown between Robert and Sandra was finally happening, and nobody wanted to miss the fireworks. I arrived early carrying a briefcase stuffed with evidence that felt heavier than a mechanic's toolbox. Rebecca sat beside me, projecting the quiet confidence of a lawyer who'd spent the weekend preparing for legal battle. Behind us, our coalition had assembled like an army. Agnes with her tablet full of security footage, George with his stack of HOA documents, Mrs. Patterson with her teacher's eye for detail, and a dozen other neighbors who'd suffered under Sandra's harassment campaign. The local news crew from Channel 12 had set up cameras after Sarah Kim's newspaper investigation went viral, bringing regional attention to what she dubbed the Oakdale harassment scandal. Reporter Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the city planning Jennifer, was interviewing residents about systematic intimidation tactics targeting elderly homeowners. The story had legs, and everyone knew tonight would determine whether justice prevailed or money won. Sandra arrived fashionably late with an expensive lawyer who probably charged more per hour than I made in a month. She'd dressed for court, conservative suit, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in what image consultants call trustworthy professional, but her eyes held the desperate intensity of someone whose entire scheme was about to collapse in public. Mayor Patricia Rodriguez called the meeting to order, with the gravity of someone who understood that tonight's proceedings would define her administration's legacy. "We're here to address allegations of systematic harassment targeting longtime residents," she announced, her voice carrying over the packed room. "This is serious business that affects our entire community's character and safety." Sheriff's Deputy Martinez took the podium first, reading from an official report that detailed months of escalating criminal activity. "We have documented evidence of property destruction, environmental crimes, interference with emergency services, and attempted extortion," he stated with professional precision. "This investigation has revealed an organized campaign designed to force property sales through illegal intimidation." Then it was my turn. I stood slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in that room, and pulled out my phone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to hear something recorded yesterday morning in my backyard." The audio quality was crystal clear as Sandra's voice filled the chamber, offering $18,000 to terminate my fire department lease, threatening bureaucratic retaliation, and finally promising that things could become very difficult if I refused her generous offer. The room went dead silent except for the whir of news cameras recording every word. You could hear people's breath catching as Sandra's recorded voice detailed her development schemes, her connections at City Hall, and her plans to make life very challenging for uncooperative residents. But the gasp that echoed through the chamber came when her voice threatened Duke. "Dogs can be so vulnerable to accidents in neighborhoods where people aren't being cooperative." Sandra's expensive lawyer was frantically scribbling notes and whispering, urgent advice, but the damage was irreversible. "You can't spin away your own voice making criminal threats on high-quality audio recording." Fire Chief Torres took the podium next, his voice shaking with controlled anger as he described blocked emergency access during Mrs. Morgan's house fire. "Someone deliberately obstructed life-saving equipment during an active emergency response," he announced. "Mrs. Morgan could have died because of those barriers, and we have evidence linking their placement to this harassment campaign." The mayor asked Sandra if she wanted to respond to the allegations. Her lawyer advised against speaking, but Sandra's ego couldn't resist one final attempt at controlling the narrative. She approached the microphone with the confidence of someone who still believed money and connections could overcome evidence and community outrage. "This is all a gross misunderstanding blown out of proportion by people who resist positive change," she began, her voice carrying the condescending tone that had infuriated neighbors for months. "I've been trying to enhance property values and improve our community's character through legitimate business development opportunities." That's when George Martinez stood up in the back of the room, his postmaster's voice cutting through her prepared speech like a blade. "Sandra, we've got your HOA meeting minutes where you called longtime residents obstacles to progress and discussed accelerating turnover through strategic pressure. We've got your contractor receipts for those emergency access barriers. We've got video of you vandalizing property and contaminating storm drains." His voice rose with righteous anger. "You tried to destroy our community for profit, and everybody in this room knows it. The crowd erupted in applause that lasted nearly 2 minutes. When Mayor Rodriguez finally restored order, she announced that the city council was unanimously authorizing full cooperation with county prosecutors investigating criminal charges. "This behavior has no place in Oakdale," she declared. "Our community protects its most vulnerable residents. It doesn't prey on them." County Prosecutor James Mitchell stepped forward with the authority of someone delivering justice. "Mrs. Thompson, you're under arrest for attempted extortion, environmental crimes, interference with emergency services, and conspiracy to commit fraud." As Deputy Martinez read her rights, Sandra's composure finally cracked completely. Her expensive lawyer was already discussing plea bargains while she was led away in handcuffs. The room erupted again as justice was served with the satisfaction of a community that had fought back and won. Marcus sat in the back row looking relieved that his nightmare marriage was finally ending. Duke, waiting outside with Agnes, probably heard the cheering from the parking lot. Justice served, community protected, and one predatory neighbor permanently removed from our peaceful neighborhood. 6 months later, Oakdale felt like a completely different town. Or maybe it was just returning to what it had always been before Sandra's toxic presence poisoned our community spirit. The morning sun still hit my kitchen window the same way, casting long shadows across Linda's coffee mug that I still couldn't bring myself to put away. But now I could drink my coffee without checking over my shoulder for surveillance cameras, or waiting for the next harassment bombshell to explode. Sandra's criminal trial had been mercifully brief once the prosecutor presented our mountain of evidence. She pleaded guilty to extortion, environmental crimes, and interference with emergency services in exchange for 16 months in county jail and 5 years probation. Her cleaning business collapsed faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, and Marcus filed for divorce before she was even sentenced. The house next door sold to a young teaching couple from Dallas who baked cookies for the entire block and actually asked permission before borrowing my ladder. My expanded county lease was officially approved the day after Sandra's arrest, bringing in $900 monthly that not only covered the increased property taxes, but provided the financial security I'd been desperately missing since Linda passed. Captain Johnson now shares garage space with the county's new emergency management coordinator and the volunteer fire department's rescue equipment, turning my property into an unofficial neighborhood safety hub that genuinely enhanced everyone's property values. Ironic, considering Sandra's original complaints. The transformation rippled through our community in ways nobody expected. The fire department presented Duke with an honorary K-9 unit certificate during a block party that drew half the town to my backyard, complete with the smell of grilling burgers mixing with diesel exhaust from the fire truck that kids were climbing on like playground equipment. Watching my golden retriever pose for photos with actual fire department dogs while wearing a badge-shaped name tag was probably the highlight of my entire retirement. George Martinez was elected HOA president in a landslide victory, running on transparency and community service instead of harassment and intimidation. His first official act was implementing term limits and requiring recorded meetings, ensuring future Sandras couldn't weaponize neighborhood politics against vulnerable residents. The HOA budget now funds annual festivals and emergency preparedness programs instead of legal fees for frivolous complaints. Rebecca Martinez expanded her legal aid practice to specialize in elder harassment cases, using our documentation system as a template for communities across Texas dealing with similar predatory behavior. She's helped prosecute systematic harassment campaigns in 8 other towns, turning our local victory into a statewide movement for vulnerable resident protection. Sometimes one person's courage to fight back can protect thousands of others. But the most meaningful change happened in smaller daily moments that restored faith in human decency. Agnes's garden parties became weekly institutions where neighbors shared resources and friendship instead of complaints and suspicions. Mrs. Patterson organized walking groups that were really excuses for retired folks to check on each other's well-being while getting exercise. The Rodriguez family opened their garage for community tool sharing, creating the mutual support network that makes small towns feel like extended family.